Witkin is one of the few artists who has really walked right into the arena with Michelangelo and Leonardo and Rubens and so forth. And I'm not saying he's beaten them by any chance, but he had the guts to step in there. He stepped in there and he said, no excuses. I am going to master the technique that is applicable to my time and so forth.
For me, Jerome's greatest gift is his ability to draw with paint. That the paintings have that kind of liveliness and the hand is visible that you see in great drawings. And I hope I can steal his trickery one day. So, if I turn slightly green in the course of the interview, it is merely the sincerity of the envious painter thinking, As a friend of mine once said, how do you do that?
Where art gets zesty and interesting is when you combine the dark and the light and the ugly and the beautiful and all those good things. And I think a great work of art subjects us to surprises of all these different brutal and pleasant reactions. And that's a rich experience.
Well, I think the important thing to remember is that Witkin is a highly moral and social person. So he uses art in order to express his feelings, his thoughts, and so on. In order to be as effective as he possibly can, he goes to art history, so that he has a wide knowledge of almost everything that has been done in the past. And he can use it eclectically in any way that he wants. So that as a result, his paintings tend to be highly organized, very complicated, and he has spent his entire life, as far as I know, involved in social issues. You see a show of his work, and chances are you're excited, you're appalled, you're disgusted, you're illuminated. I mean, you're amazed. You're just bowled over. I mean, you get a succession of reactions, and especially if this is in a fairly small space, it becomes really overwhelming. I know one of his most disturbing images is a naked man rearing up in pain in the back because he'd been given an electric shock. It is a painting that is very difficult to take when you see it in conjunction with the other paintings that he has done. But he makes his point. You take it or leave it. And I think that in the act of taking or leaving it, you make a decision that is important to us. I mean, you make a decision to censor or not to censor, or to pull back or not to pull back, or something of that sort. He is a community involver. I think that.
Somehow, by going into this difficulty, you come out with surprises. But if you don't invite the difficulty, you'll never have a rewarding, maybe, experience.
As a young man, he was trained as an abstract expressionist, and he has the freedom in his heart and the freedom in his brush strokes to be able to kind of combine the chaos of abstraction with the qualities of, being able to delineate something to, photographic quality, and combining these two elements, he's become like a force of nature. I've never seen a painter who can paint with the passion and expressive power of Jerome. It's as good as it gets.
I curated an exhibition at One Penn Plaza in New York entitled Movie Tone Muse. And the notion was motion pictures viewed from earliest years onwards have affected all visual artists, all painters. It's obviously all movie makers and all of us, in fact. But if they've affected, as they have, everyone. And it's traceable in 1,000 permutations. In Jerome's case, there was a terrific triptych, one of his very best paintings, I think, actually, entitled Division Street, about a remembered traumatic moment in childhood. The father fleeing out the door in a hail of dishes spattered across the wall with a bravura paint stroke everywhere in a kind of greenish light that seems sort of signature of Jerome in many of his paintings anyway. And the sense of it being like three separate shots meant to tell a story and meant to interact back and forth. It's certainly true. It's a narrative, and the triptych is a very time-honored form. I just gave a talk in Santa Barbara on the topic of genius. But among the things I said is another aphorism of Baudelaire, that genius is the ability to recapture childhood at will. And it recaptures Jerome's childhood. It recaptures it with the kind of truth-telling that marks, say, someone like Goya's work, you know. It's true, and you admire the nerve of making it public, you know. You recognize in it his truth, but it also makes you speculate about your truth, you know, about whatever it is that is sort of your version of Alice Miller's book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, those things lingering back there. And I might use that rarefied term, masterpiece, to describe that particular painting.
Jerome puts color at the service of form, but he puts both color and form at the service of presence. I was going to say at the service of narrative, but it's not. The narrative, too, is at the service of presence. The important thing about any picture he paints is that it is that the picture itself and what is in it are in front of you, there, very credibly there.
Since he wants to make his point, all that matters to him is that the idea get across. He uses almost any device that he can get hold of. One of his most effective is cinematic, is that he will take 3 to 6 or 7 large canvases, each adjacent to the other, and will treat them sequally, so that in the first image you'll have something happening to a character, in the second image you'll have something else happening to him, until at the end something horrible has happened to him, or he has been resurrected.
I was going through the end of my first marriage in Syracuse to my Dutch wife, Keeney Pumpen. I remember we had this terrible night in this bedroom that we knew we were going to split. We tried to get together, but we knew it was Splitville. And the bedroom felt like chokingly tight. There's no room in the bedroom. And I thought, I don't know, maybe I'll make a painting of this moment, and it can exercise the agony of this time. So about 1.5 years later, I was looking at a Newsweek magazine, and it was during, I guess, the 70s, yeah. So there was a picture in Newsweek of a man, a policeman with a guard dog, in the back of a subway train. And I looked at the picture, and suddenly my mind put on that picture. It took the cop away and the dog away, and it put me in a pair of pajamas from that bedroom. So I was on the subway in a pair of pajamas. And suddenly, like, yes, you know, my vulnerability could be presumed now, but I put a man in my mind on the subway in this place. Then the chair next to the policeman who sits there, and suddenly I was thinking of a woman stabbing a child with the pajamas on for some reason. And I said, that's the painting. That's my relationship to this woman. The thing was, I would make these panels and thicker panels. And so the man was feeling, the tall man with the pajama, he was feeling the wounds of the woman standing, a voodoo doll. And at the end, he wakes up, and the woman is touching his hand, and he wakes up in the room with the blonde woman. So, I mean, I don't know if that answers anything, but it's a way of how you unexpectedly see some image that ignites something that was waiting for you. I really have a feeling that I've always felt this deeply, that my paintings are very familiar to me when I finish them. It's like there's a coloring book that was put in my soul, and I'm simply putting color on the lines. It's spooky, but true.
Jerome's father was Jewish, while his mother, of Italian descent, was a Roman Catholic. When Jerome was around 3 years old, his father left the home. From then on, Jerome would not see much of him, and his few visits were always a tense and unhappy time. Jerome's mother, Mary, was left alone to raise her 3 children: Sarah, the older sister, and identical twins, Jerome and Joel Peter. When he was a boy and didn't know how to swim, Jerome almost drowned in the luxurious swimming pool of the Hotel St. George in Brooklyn. By a curious twist of fate, as he struggled in the water, gasping for air, his eyes gazed at the beautiful glass ceiling his father had made. This experience would change Jerome profoundly.
Because I had a near-death experience when I was 13 years old, I saw the other side. I felt great peace. And I saw this wonderful, shiny face smiling at me, and I smelled roses beyond roses. And I was drowning, and I was panicking because I knew I was going to die in a few seconds. I knew my mother would be very upset at night, but there's always my twin brother. But when I saw this thing, I said, who cares? I'm going there. And I think because I had that revelation, that gift of seeing this other eternity, I see this life as a kind of, a difficult but short trial. I'll get through it, and, I'll pay my dues. I'll hopefully help the world in some way, and get out of town.
He is one individual, and he has feelings, and among them is love. He is a great lover. I mean, he really has love in him. I've always felt that we are really in many ways alone in this world, each of us, although we do have contact with other individuals. And so a work of art is the device through which one individual expresses his or her love, and it is then, in a sense, shared with the rest of humanity.
I ask people to take a pose that feels natural, and maybe I kind of, light them a little differently, like today's work. But I couldn't have imagined this girl's pose unless you took the pose. I mean, to me, the stillness of her was a kind of thinking moment of pleasure, and I could look at her and say, interesting girl, and look away. But here I'm looking at her constantly because I want to have this hugely important happening, this gift I got from her to put on the canvas. This is a beautiful. Here we go. Lovely. And I mean, I would rather think in terms of my human response to people than my so-called intellectual response to painting. I'd rather have the people and the human reaction drive the painting and drive my interest, drive my concerns, than any kind of, intellectual game of, the house rules for this year or something. And I really don't care if my work looks foolish to a lot of people or unimportant or passé or something. What concerns me is being a human being in a very short lifetime, which we have, and how one gets through it and how one survives life itself. The first time I showed in a museum, Death is an Usher, which is my first 25-foot Holocaust picture. It was shown at the Jewish Museum, the earlier Jewish Museum in New York City. At that point, they had the docents of the museum were all concentration camp survivors. And the true test of my fiction was that all of these women and men loved my painting because it made them feel I had made some truth there.
He has produced a body of work that cannot be denied. I mean, it's just there. And even if you go back to some of the paintings he did in the 80s of the Nazis, I'm thinking of one, I forget the title, but there's a girl running, and it's a triptych, I think. It holds up as powerfully now as it did then. And it's also exciting as paint, just paint.
I've looked at several works based on the Holocaust, and very few try to recreate the terror, the absolute terror of inmates or people on their way to the camps. There are images of boxcars, images of railroad tracks, images even in the camps, but nothing evoking the psychological, or not as much evoking the psychological and physical terror that he seems to evoke. And he gets right to the heart of the sadistic impulses of those who are killing Jews and shows the torture of Jews. And I don't know, I'm sure there must be other artists, but I don't know of any who get right to the heart of that matter. And what he does is, in effect, make visual images that parallel the statements by survivors when they describe their tortures, which are harrowing to read. He makes pictures that are harrowing to look at. And when you look at things like The Butcher's Helper or The Beating Room, I just don't know any other works like those that physically assault you. They're difficult to look at, and they're big works. So that if you get up close to them, they surround your peripheral vision and you're in the work, as it were. And that makes a very unpleasant feeling. And I think that's what, I don't know if Witkin wants that, but that's certainly the effect it has. And the more unpleasant the feeling, to me, the better the work is because it's evoking that physical violence.
I think basically, I have a sense of not optimism when I look at people, but I think of the fragility of people that intrigues me. the fragility of how they get through things. I think for tragedy, I think of fragility. I think if I would go to a concentration camp, and when I was there in Birkenau, I would think about how my sister would make through, or my mother would make through. I'm not panicking about dying because I've lost my sense of death. But at the same time, I think in the Jewish sense of tikkun olam, you make your life a place where you can improve life for others.
The concept of tikkun olam is a Kabbalistic notion. It comes from Rabbi Isaac Luria, a 16th century Kabbalist who lived in the town of Sfat, which is now in Israel. And it has to do with his notion of the creation of the world, in which, in the creation of the world, whether you believe it or not is not the point, but this is his theory, that some of the vessels of light were broken in all the cosmic tumult, and some evil creeped into this light. And the way you can help complete the creation of the world so that the world will be a wonderful place to live in is to lead a religious life and to work for the betterment of humanity. And that means peace, siblinghood in the sense of brotherhood, sisterhood, a religious life, a life of well-being, well-meaning. And instead of contributing only to your own betterment, you want to contribute to the betterment of the world in some way. There's ways of doing this. And Witkin's way is to show this is what can happen if the evil path triumphs.
The dead and dying were all around us. Piles of naked dead were stacked beside the crematorium and inside. Dachau was certainly a calculated attempt by the Nazis to desecrate not only the body, but also the mind and spirit. Dead dogs lay in the kennels nearby, killed by our military, after survivors told us they were used to tear away parts of prisoners' bodies on command. Survivors told us infants were torn limb from limb as their mothers watched. They told us that prisoners who could no longer work were used as live targets for machine gun practice. I wish I could describe the smells and silence of death. Even now, certain sights and sound can remind me of that pain, that suffering, that sorrow and loss and anguish and degradation. We felt we were dancing with death. We couldn't get away from it and wondered if it would ever stop.
People like Witkin and others might have what might be called secondary trauma. They didn't experience the event directly, but they are traumatized by the experiences of others. And in order to either record that secondary trauma or exorcise it in some way, they make paintings accordingly, or sculptures, whatever the play, whatever the response is, so that any work of art has to be secondhand, as it were. But it's in the evocation of the first-hand experience that I find the power of Witkin's work.
Also, he paints very wonderful, straightforward landscape and figurative works. He's capable of relaxation in a very wonderful way. In fact, I think that I like some of those of his works the best of all, I think.
over the years, and I began painting at 7 years old, painting becomes almost like a kind of a style of walking or a style of talking. You're so used to it that you don't know how you sound unless you see a movie of yourself or you see somebody imitating you. I think life is such a privileged situation, and to be an artist is the best, because you can react to it, you can make children in terms of your works of art, and leave all sorts of philosophical and emotive responses. It's great.
There's a real difference between an artist working out their inner turmoil and as an act of therapy versus creating a work of art that transcends the self. Jerome tackles subjects about history, and while he's placed himself in it, it's not as self-indulgent as being personal history. He's merely a small fragment of a very, very enormous world and a world history, and that's what he needs to release somehow. It seems that he has this great need to give testament to what is taking place in the world today.
My son Andrew, when he was much younger, about 2 years old, would make these great philosophical questions. I mean, like kids walk around and say things, and he would go around saying things like, "What do people do? What people do?" He kept saying that. What people do? And maybe it could be said, the artist does a lot of things constantly, where maybe a lot of other people who are not artists don't think about what they're doing. So, but the artist, I think, is a kind of an angelic, God-given gift to their own time.